a pretty long train. He's been rolling for a minute now. But Travelers Rest, historic house and museum, right on the outskirts of Nashville, Tennessee. Part of the Great American Treasures and part of the Civil War Trails, Battle of Nashville. They're open Tuesday through Saturday from 10 to 4:30. They got tours throughout the day, closed on Sunday and Monday. Welcome, y'all. Like I said, I'm here at Travelers Rest. I'm going to go through the museum, the house, walk the grounds. I've never been here before, so I'm going to show you guys around as well. So this is going to be all new to me. And that train is loud. Anyways, here we go. Travelers Rest. The first part of this house was built in 1799 by Judge John Overton, one-time revenue collector for the Metro District of North Carolina, later member of the Tennessee Supreme Court and longtime friend of Andrew Jackson. These two, with General James Winchester, developed West Tennessee and founded Memphis in 1819. There's a picture of Travelers Rest, 1884. Hope you can see it. And this is the visitor center here at Travelers Rest. You go in and buy your tickets. We're going to go in the Elizabeth Wade Craig Museum before we go through the house. Kind of watch maybe a little video or something. Probably talk about the Battle of Nashville. So we're going to go in and see what this is about. The Battle of Nashville. Nashville's history unfolds at Travelers Rest. The history of the Judge John and Mary Overton family begins in Tennessee in 1789, restored to its 1833 appearance. The year of Judge Overton's death, Travelers Rest is the heart of the Overton family. Their story reflects 19th century Nashville history from its early economic and political development through the Civil War and to Reconstruction and the new post-war economy. This exhibit begins with the Judge's early days but focuses on the dramatic role the family played in the Civil War and notably the Battle of Nashville from December 15th through December 16th, 1864. We invite you to learn about the Overtons and those tumultuous days. And here is a picture of John Overton and his wife, Harriet Maxwell Overton. It's the 1860s census for Davidson County. Davidson County has Nashville in it.
A Confederate army under General John Bell Hood launched an invasion of Tennessee with the objective of capturing Nashville. After the devastating defeat at Franklin on November 30th, his forces approached Nashville. Colonel Overton rode with them. The Overtons, with their friends and family, turned out enthusiastically to greet them.
My mother noted 3 horsemen entering the avenue gate. A few seconds of time and they were at the door. Responding to the quest for Overton, they watched the bombshells that were flying through the air and lighting in various parts of the grounds and garden. A bombshell struck the wall of the little dining room, making a large hole. Into this room, 14 servants had congregated, and they just left in time. Otherwise, there would have been great loss of life.
The blood of black and white men flowed freely together for one common cause of freedom and independence. As a result, wherever the flag of our love goes.
The land itself was purchased in 1796. So David Maxwell received a land grant from North Carolina. Tennessee didn't become a state until 1796, so this is before then. And they're sort of granting out land in this territory. And David Maxwell received 640 acres. His heirs then decided after his death to sort of partition it up and resell it. So John Overton bought 320 acres from the heirs of David Maxwell. And then it was on that land that he started to build this house in 1799. I know, isn't it just beautiful? And our magnolias are getting ready to bloom. They will well established streets in that photo. So we call them witness streets.
Yeah.
Because we know that they were here to witness the battles of the Civil War.
Which ones?
These two here. Okay, so this is our home. You'll notice a seam
The
to
witness
left
tree.
of the door. And everything to the right was that structure that was built in So they would have used the downstairs as office space and then the upstairs as sort of a boarding room for clients, but also for apprentices. So there was no law school. You would apprentice under a practice lawyer and just learn that way. So students would have stayed here as well. We're not going to enter in through this front door. This would have been the front door in 1799, but we're actually going to go around to the side of the house. So his family expanded rapidly. He needed a lot more space to accommodate that. He also, at that point, was a very wealthy man. He had friends. He was friends with Andrew Jackson, who was campaigning for the presidency. So his social status had changed. He's now in that sort of upper echelon and hosting events, hosting parties. He's kind of acting as a campaign manager of sorts for Jackson in this Middle Tennessee area. And so that's another reason he expanded the home, because he added in an entertainment space. Now here at the end of the porch, you can see where that bell is. That was another structure added onto the home in 1885. That's actually a kitchen. So prior to 1885, there's sort of technology means that kitchens are really bad fire hazards. And so you wouldn't want a kitchen attached to the main home because the fire could jump from the kitchen to the house. So they would have been independent structures. It also would have been a way to keep out the enslaved workers from the main house, because they're the ones who are preparing the food. And so by keeping that structure separate, you're keeping them separate from the family as well. We won't enter into our kitchen because it's no longer a kitchen. We use it as office spaces today, and we have educational programming that we do in there. But that's the only portion of the house that we won't see. So we're gonna head up into the back door.
It's a wide porch.
I just love these big porches, especially with a rocking chair. You can see it stood the test of time very well. You also can notice the square nail heads. Those are the original nail heads. So John Overton, he owned slaves. That's completely expected of his social and socioeconomic status. We know that when he first came here and built his home, he owned 3 slaves. At the time of his death, he owned about 53 slaves. So his wealth had grown rapidly. He was a land speculator, so he made his fortune buying and then reselling parcels of land. At the time of his death, he also owned 65,000 acres of land, so quite a wealthy man.
Yeah.
One of the slaves that he owned was Harry. He was a blacksmith. He was a very skilled blacksmith. He made these square nail heads that have obviously stood the test of time. Mm-hmm. And then we also know that Judge Overton would have leased his labor. So we have letters and sort of contracts leasing out Harry and his blacksmithing. So he was also very... So that is the man himself, John Overton. Now, he started off as a lawyer here in Tennessee in the 1780s. He was about 20 years old when he came over. He was living in boarding houses, and that is when he met Andrew Jackson, who's also a lawyer living in boarding houses. They met, they become best friends. They have very opposite personalities. You may be familiar with Jackson, who's a war hero, sort of very outgoing. He married young, scandalous marriage. Overton, on the other hand, was more of what we would consider an introvert. He liked to read. He sort of kept to himself. He married very late in life. But they did maintain a very close friendship up until Overton's death. So they considered themselves best friends. I'll point out just quickly, Lou here in the corner, this was Overton. He was another enslaved person owned by Overton, but he was his valet. So he was a personal attendant. He traveled with him. And we believe that he was integral to Overton's success because we have a letter from one of Overton's sons-in-law saying that Lou's been sick. And if you travel soon, you may want to think about taking someone else with you to help you, because if Lou fell ill while you're on the road, you would be just completely lost without him. So another really important figure in this story is Lou. Now, Overton's career begins as a lawyer. He's one of the first 7 lawyers in Tennessee, but he is appointed pretty soon by George Washington as a tax collector. And so he's traveling around the southwestern territory collecting taxes on liquor distilleries. And they're using those taxes to pay off the Revolutionary War debt. He then becomes a circuit court judge, which means he has a 600-mile circuit that he travels twice a year. So if you've seen an old Western film, there's conflicts between people, and the sheriff says, okay, well, the judge will be here in a month, and he'll solve the problem. That's Judge Overton. That's what he's doing, is riding that circuit. Now, we think that is when he changes the name to Traveler's Rest from Golgotha, because he is now sort of the weary traveler, traveling most of the year, and he comes home to rest. Later on, he joins the predecessor to the state Supreme Court, the Superior Court of Errors and Appeals, and it is while he is a judge on that court that he writes the Overton Reports. Now, these are the first 2 volumes of the Tennessee Reports, and they're the legal precedent of the state. Prior to that, Tennessee had been using North Carolina legal precedent, so he sort of starts the Tennessee legal precedent, the record keeping of that precedent. And if you'll look at his portrait there, you'll see 3 volumes behind his shoulder. Those are the Overton Reports. So clearly that was something he was very proud of having done. Now, in our home, we only have about 10% of original Overton items. That is sort of a byproduct of the Civil War. We were looted. The home was looted after the war. They were Confederate sympathizers, and the Confederacy lost the war, and so the Union soldiers came through, and they did loot much of the furnishings and the crops and things like that. But I'll try to point out what we have that is original as we go through the home. Okay. So our portrait here is original. The clock is original. The cane on the mantle is original. And then over here we've got a ledger that is it is John Overton's ledger, and then a check for $57. And I said he was a land speculator. That check, we believe, would have been used to buy land. Land was going for about 15 to 25 cents an acre. So $57 would buy you a lot of land. So he's clearly a very wealthy man. And I'll show you, we've got this invitation here for General Lafayette. It was a ball that was held in his honor. And there is a champagne coupe. It is, I think let's see. I don't recall how many, 200 and some odd year anniversary of this ball, and marking Lafayette's visit to Tennessee.
Wow.
And so that is on loan to us from a private collector.
I didn't know he ever came this far west.
I know, yeah, exactly. I wasn't aware of it either. I can check. Might be able to quickly pull up my email with the blurb. This is what we have set up as Mary's room. So here's a portrait of Mary McConnell May. Is that right? No, White May. Mary McConnell White May. So her father was James White. He established White's Fort, which today is Knoxville, Tennessee. And her husband was Dr. Francis May, who was the personal physician to Andrew Jackson. So her father was in the land business, her husband was the physician to Andrew Jackson, running in the same social circle with John Overton.
So that's how she would have met John
exactly
through Andrew.
Exactly. So her husband passed away. She was left with 5 children between the ages of about 4 and 18, so very young children. This is during a time period that's not very kind to women, but particularly not kind to single mothers. So we think, Overton may have stepped in to help a friend.
Yeah.
He didn't have an heir. He was unmarried. It was late in life. He was 54, I believe, at the time of their marriage. And so he may have been considering what the future looks like for the estate and the wealth that he had amassed. But also they were friends, and so we think it could have been motivated by that. Sort of family lore says that he told her, "I do not profess to love you, but I'll be a good and faithful husband and a good father to your children. You have 20 minutes to answer." So, to her credit, she lasted the full 20 minutes before she accepted the proposal, but they did marry, and then they went on to have 3 more children of their own. So, John Overton Jr., Anne, and Elizabeth. On our mantelpiece, we've got a miniature of John Overton as a young man, and then their daughter, Elizabeth, here. And we have them blown up as well, if you'd like to see closer. So Mary was an interesting figure. There was a sort of unique physical feature about her that made her stand out. This is an original set of drawers and mirror. Maybe you can guess what that physical feature was.
She must have been tall.
She was 6 feet tall. She was
Wow.
very tall for a woman. John Overton was just 5'4". So she used to say she could hold out an arm and hang a husband because her previous husband had been quite short as well. So she was a fun figure. She was also an herbalist. So she kept an herb garden and an apothecary case, and she would have acted as a sort of neighborhood nurse if you couldn't get in contact with the doctor. Now, all 8 of her children lived to adulthood, and we think we can credit that to the fact that she was interested in medicine, and her first husband had been a doctor.
And that was rare. Okay, the stairs were always narrow and
I know,
steep.
especially those pie piece ones. Those are just, those trip you up every time. Okay, so this is our original door. It's poplar wood and it's been lacquered to look like a faux mahogany. This is a really time-consuming process. It certainly takes more time and costs more than just getting mahogany wood, but it works to seal the wood. So it's another sign of wealth, and also actually really good for the longevity of the door. So this hardware and this door is original, and the rest have been modeled after it. We're standing in our guest room. Any guesses as to how many people you could sleep in a bed like this?
Several.
So we would have 4 people in this bed. So you'd have them top to tail, like in Willy Wonka, sort of when the grandparents are sleeping. So that's what you would expect here, and in that bed as well. So we could get 8 people in here. Traveler's Rest is not, it is a private home, but during this time period, it's not unexpected or uncommon for a traveler to request shelter. So someone may be traveling down the road, it gets dark, they see the lights, they come and knock on the door and ask to spend the night. And you'd be, expected to accept and let them stay the night. We also would have had friends coming to visit. So Andrew Jackson was Overton's best friend. It takes us 45 minutes to get from here to the Hermitage, Andrew Jackson's historic home. It would have taken them about 6 hours. They would have had to use a ferry to get over the river. It would have been very complicated to travel from there to here. So he's not coming just for dinner. He's coming to stay for weeks at a time. So he would have stayed in this room, he and his wife, Rachel. Another really sort of interesting character is Sam Houston. So Sam Houston was a law partner of Overton's at one point. He became the governor of Tennessee, and then he married a woman, Eliza Allen. So they were friends. They, with Overton, they decided to spend part of their honeymoon here at Traveler's Rest. And apparently they fought the entire time that they were here. And Eliza decided that she just made a big mistake. She didn't want to be married. She wanted to go back home. Well, Sam Houston, politician, that's scandalous. It's going to end his political career. He asks her not to leave him. She doesn't care. She goes home, and his political career in Tennessee is ruined. So he goes out to Texas. He becomes the governor of Texas. gives his name to the city of Houston, Texas, and he's the only man to be governor of 2 states.
Oh.
So a really interesting sort of figure who also stayed here at this home. Now, 2 little details I'll point out to you. One is our mini bar of sorts. Over there is that trunk. So those are pints and quarts of alcohol. So Overton had an orchard. He grew peaches, pears, and apple, but he was known to distill his own peach brandy. So he would have come up and unlocked the sort of crate for you and told you to mind your P's and Q's, mind your pints and quarts. Don't drink all this alcohol. So that's our recreational alcohol. Up on the mantle, we've got what would have been medicinal alcohol. And then behind you here is our trundle bed. So this could have been used, maybe all the beds are full and we've got a 9th person who needs a place to sleep. That's one way that bed could have been used. But also, and maybe likely for the sort of socioeconomic status that Overton was in, the friends that he had also would have had personal attendants like Lou downstairs. So a valet or a personal attendant also would have slept in a trundle bed like this. You're keeping that class difference, you're denoting that status change, but they're on hand during the nighttime if needed. Describe the space, which is a stair landing, just a landing. We wouldn't really use this as an extra bedroom, but you can see we have a military campaign bed here. So the Overtons would have used this as storage. It wouldn't have been a permanent room, but if the beds are all full, there's nowhere else to sleep in the house, you could pop up a bed like this. It's a military campaign bed. It's used on military campaign, and it can be relatively easily disassembled and packed up in a trunk. So not as easy as an air mattress today, but sort of the equivalent of that air mattress. And the story of how we get the name the cold room is that during the Civil War, so Overton and Mary have passed away. The next generation are now living in the home, John Overton Jr. and his wife, Harriet. During the war, John Overton Jr. was not at Travelers Rest. He was further south, and so Harriet was running the estate, and she had invited her sisters to come stay with her, so the family was together. And in 1864, the Confederate General, John Bell Hood, sort of decided he was going to launch an attack on the city of Nashville. It had been the first Confederate state capital to fall back to Union control, and so he wanted to try to take it back. And he was invited by John Overton Jr. to use Travelers Rest as his headquarters. So the generals and the officers were all staying in the house, and one of this you would fill with hot coals, and then you want to get a video of this, so you'd fill it with hot coals, and then you would just sort of iron bed sheets, get some heat in the sheets, and then you would empty this back into the fire. You wouldn't want to leave hot coals in the bed with you. That would be very unsafe. But you do that, you close the canopy and try to keep some of that heat in overnight. And so we know she would have done something like that, to combat that winter storm. So I'll head us into the children's room. So Mary brought her 5 children with her. Now some of them were teenagers. They wouldn't have lived in the home. They would have set out for their own, adult lives. But she had her younger children and then the Overton children. They would have been raised together. They all would have received a good education. Governesses when they're young, schooling when they're older. Both boys and girls, with their governess would have learned reading, writing, arithmetic. The girls would have learned feminine arts, so sewing and needlepoint. Here I've got this is called a sampler. This is not original to the family, but the girls, Anne and Elizabeth, the Overton girls, would have absolutely made something like this. And you can kind of think of it as a graduation project of sorts. So when you're about 11 years old, you'd be expected to create something like this with the decorative border, the alphabet, the numbers, your name, the date, location, and then sort of a famous quote or saying, maybe a Bible verse, something like that. And that is proof that you now have the skill set to sew for the family. Now, at about the age of 11, the children would have been sent off to school. So, John Overton Jr. was sent to a boarding school in New Orleans. He was boarded with a family that spoke French, so we have letters that he wrote home in French.
Yeah.
We have no evidence that anyone here spoke French, so he was sort of showing off that he did that. The girls were sent to the Nashville Female Academy, which was in the city. We've got a pallet here on the floor. This would have been used by an enslaved woman who would have watched the children in the nighttime. So Mary wouldn't be getting up with the kids, with the baby. That wouldn't be her job. She would have had an enslaved woman who had that task, and then you would be able to roll up that pallet and put it into a blanket chest during the day. Now these beds, you'll notice, are rope beds. So we don't have a box spring mattress. We've got rope. And you would use something like this, a rope key, or a bed key to tighten the rope. So you put it in, tighten the rope, and if you've ever been told to sleep tight, it comes from the usage of rope beds. Now, you'll also notice our mosquito netting here and the canopy that we've had on several of the beds we've seen so far. In the summertime, you'd open up the windows to sort of get a breeze, a cross breeze blowing through the house, and you'd also be letting in bugs. So you'd have a canopy or mosquito netting, something like that, to protect you in the bed. And then again, in the winter, it's so cold, you would use that to trap the body heat in the bed as well. Now, in this room, our only original item is the crib. And again, it's not from the Overtons, the direct descendants of the Overtons. It's from a cousin's family. And actually, it was in the family so recently that the last child who slept in that crib took a tour through the home just a few years ago. As a man, he came through and he said that he had been the last baby to use the crib before it was donated back into the house. So it's been well used and loved. Another sort of important story I'd like to share is about Washington. He was a child that lived on here at Travelers Rest. So there would have been enslaved children here for sure. We know we had slaves, we know that there were children. They would not have been receiving the same provisions or education as the white children. But Washington was the son of Samuel Overton, who was John Overton's brother. And Samuel Overton had a child with an enslaved. This is our ladies' parlor. So I told you, Judge Overton, he was hosting fancy events. Well, after a fancy dinner, a ball, something like that, you wouldn't be socializing. Co-ed socialization wouldn't happen. You would have separated. The women would have gone into a ladies' parlor. The men would have gone into a gentleman's parlor. However, they would have been doing really similar things. They would have been playing card games. They would have been drinking perhaps that peach brandy that Overton distilled. They would have been smoking pipe tobacco, using snuff. All of that stuff they were doing, just not together. I'll point out to you these card tables. These are original to the home. So furniture during this time period is very multi-purpose. So you want to be able to push it up against the wall, get it out of the way. So there are wheels on these card tables. This one is folded and pushed up against the wall. This table here with our chess set, that is the same table, it's just been opened for our chess game. We've also got a Masonic clock. So Judge Overton was a Freemason. And so we have that clock there on the mantelpiece. We've got this mirror here that is original to the family. In terms of furniture, I think that's everything that's original in this room. We've also got these three portraits, which are original. This is Mary, the last portrait we have before her death. So she's significantly older in this image, but still looking good. And then across the way we have her son, James White, May. So he's from that first marriage. And his daughter, then, Susan, is here. Now, a sort of tragic story about her son is that he was involved in an accident. He was either thrown from a horse or in a carriage when there was a carriage accident, and he was rendered unconscious. Now, I mentioned Mary was something of a neighborhood nurse, and so we think that the people were unable to get into contact with with the doctor, and so they called on Mary to come provide medical services, but they either didn't know or chose not to tell her that the victim of the accident was her son. And so she arrived and realized it was her son who was unconscious. And unfortunately, he never regained consciousness and died pretty soon after. Exactly, yes ma'am. And then this here is a pianoforte. It isn't original to the family, but we have reconstructed this room, the wallpaper and the furnishings and everything, based off of written accounts, written record of what the room looked like. So we know they would have had a pianoforte in here.
And that would have been a big part of their entertainment.
Exactly, exactly.
That's part of the children's education too. They all have
Music.
to learn the music.
Exactly, yes ma'am. That kind of thing. So in this space, I'll point out we have several original items. Some fun ones are our marble top tables. We've got one here and one here. You'll notice there's mirrors underneath. You would have lit candles in front of the mirrors, and then the mirror would reflect the light back into the room. And then another example of that same phenomenon is this convex mirror here, which has the candles in front of it, and that is reflecting light back in. We've also got our sideboard here. That is, you can see, kind of tall. That we think would have been a custom-made piece of furniture for Mary.
Yeah.
And then our portrait of Mary is original as well. She's in mourning. This was painted in the late 1840s. Her son had passed away in 1843. Overton had passed away in 1833. So she's in mourning probably for both of those deaths.
Mm-hmm.
Another original item we have in here is our autograph book. So this is from one of Harriet's sisters. And I mentioned that Harriet had all of her sisters here in the house during the Civil War. And so when General John Bell Hood was at the home, preparing for his march on Nashville, in preparation for the Battle of Nashville, he signed that autograph book. These chairs are also original. There was originally a set of 6. They wanted 12. So one set was made in, I believe, Kentucky, and then in order to expand the set out and get another 6 to make 12, they hired a woodworker here in Nashville to make the other. And then our sofa over here in the corner, that's also original. And then here is John Overton Jr. So I'll tell you a little bit about him in the Civil War. He was sort of against secession. Tennessee voted no originally, but then on the second vote, they voted yes, they did secede from the Union. He wrote a check for the Confederate Army of $125,000. In today's money, that's about $20 million. So there's a massive investment in the Confederate Army. And then, like I said, the city of Nashville, it was one of the first, or the first, Confederate capital to fall back to federal control. So he was very close to enemy lines very soon after he'd given that sizable donation. And a warrant for his arrest was issued. And so he flees traveler's arrest. He flees Nashville. He goes south to Mississippi. And he waits out the war there, where he's a little bit safer from the Union. And so he leaves the house in control of Harriet and her sisters. And they're the ones who are running the estate during the entirety of the war. It is on his invitation, though, that General John Bell Hood comes to Traveler's Rest to prepare for that Battle of Nashville. Now, I mentioned there was a winter storm. He arrived at the very beginning of December. The winter storm hits and it traps him here for about 2 weeks. So they wait out the storm, but then on December 15th, we have the first day of the battle. And the women and the enslaved people in the home used to take shelter, and about 15 minutes after they took shelter, artillery shells came through the wall in this room here, so just in the nick of time.
It's kind of like Franklin. I said it was so bad at Franklin. He could walk. He had to walk across bodies.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I don't like stuff like that.
I don't either. So that's the house. Now we've got the grounds around here that I'd like to point out. So if you follow this path around the side
This is the event area. They made it kind of like the stables. They believe this is where the stables were on the property. And so that's where they put that. But basically, she said it's event space for weddings, birthday parties, graduation parties, all that stuff. This added on part right here is what was the kitchen area, but it's now used as office space and everything. We didn't go in that. This is the old smokehouse. Old copper pot. Kind of has a little bit of a smoke smell to it. Not much. But a lot of these old smokehouses that you go into, they were used so much in the woods original that you can still smell the smoke. Like I said, you can still smell the smoke smell a little bit in here after all these years. Let's go in the Weaver house. The old Weaver weaving the wool. Weaving the thread. We'll go upstairs, because upstairs is a headstone of the only person that is still buried here on the grounds. Everyone else was moved to Mount Olivet in Nashville, or on the outskirts of Nashville, north of Nashville, I believe. Ooh, boy. Whew. Some of these boards is weak. Got me nervous now. So this is the headstone of Washington, son of Samuel Overton, who was the brother to John Overton. Son of Samuel Overton, who was the brother of John Overton. So this would be John Overton's nephew. He was 35 years old when he passed. And this headstone was found like a pile of brush that had been moved. So they don't know where the grave is on the property. They just know that he is still buried here somewheres. And he was the only one that was not moved to the public cemetery because of records that they have stating that as well. Why? I don't know. She didn't know why he wasn't moved either. So, but I'm getting back downstairs because this floor is a little too soft for me up here. So coming down the stairs, making a little bit of noise. A few things is vibrating. This is the Weaver's house. I'll check this plaque out. You can see the trains back there in the background. One's a moving on the other side. This is about horses, Arabian horses. It says, as was the case with many upper-class Southern families in the 19th and early 20th century, the Overtons engaged in the breeding of fine horses. However, Travelers Rest was not devoted solely to breeding one type of horse until 1929. Jacob McGavick Dickinson Jr., great-grandson of John Overton, purchased the 440-acre farm at Travelers Rest and established one of the largest Arabian horse farms in the United States. Because Arabians were one of the oldest known breeds, Dickinson carefully researched pedigrees and corresponded with breeders in Poland, Egypt, and Middle East to locate the purest stock. His efforts led to international recognition as a breeder of Arabian horses for sport and pleasure. Dickinson relocated the horse farm to California in 1946. Got some pictures here. It says this small section of concrete foundation is all that remains of a horse stable that stood in this area. Evidence of red brick beneath the concrete suggests that an earlier outbuilding, perhaps associated with the Overton plantation, preceded the stable. The completion of the Radnor Yard Railroad expansion in 1954 cut greatly into the hillside and the pastures behind the house. This forced the removal of many of the farm's outbuildings and barns. And here's the concrete pad that this is on. Now I want to mention, if you notice how the house kind of sits up on a slight hill, and if you kind of go all the way around the house, it kind of slopes up all the way around. This area that the house sits on was once an Indian burial mound. And they know that because when the house was being built in the 1790s, they were digging into that Indian burial mound and they found approximately 30 different graves or skeletons. And so because of that, the house was first known as Golgotha. And that come from the New Testament in the Bible, where Christ was crucified. So if you look here, right here, kind of how it comes up a little bit, she said that was kind of the start of it, and it eventually went on up a little bit. But it wasn't until later that the name was changed to Travelers Rest. Now the name Golgotha really wasn't official for the house. That's just kind of what people called it because it was on the Indian burial ground, place of the skulls. So yeah, and during that time, of course, the whites and the Indians did not get along. They were fighting, did not have no respect for each other. So they don't know where the bodies were relocated. They think they were probably relocated somewhere here on the property, but they don't know where at. And because there was no respect between the two, they went on and built a home on the Indian mound. A lot of famous people from back in the day come through here. George Washington, Andrew Jackson, Sam Houston, who was the only person to ever be governor of 2 states, Tennessee and Texas. And that is where the city Houston got its name. There is a lot of big, huge trees here on this property as well. We got a gravel drive that kind of circled circled a round in front of the home. I'm sure back in the day it's probably just dirt, no gravel, if they even had a so-called driveway or path or whatever. Don't know. It may have just been something like this, just a straight shot up to the front door. And this is right outside the white fence, looking back at the house. But stay tuned. I'm going to take you over to Mount Olivet to see the graves of the Overtons that lived here. So we made it over to Mount Olivet. This is a very, very old cemetery. And we are here. Grave of John Overton. See the J-O there? Said he was born April 9th, 1766, died April 12th, 1833. And his wife Mary is here as well. And on the back side of the marker, trying to get a glare out. It says, fulfilling the wish of Mary M. Overton, the following were reinterred from the Travelers Rest Cemetery on November 20th, 1868. And then it says, Judge John Overton, Samuel Overton, Ann Overton Brinkley, Richard Berry, Mary Berry, H.L. Berry, and Andrew Jackson May. I hope you may have got to see it, because it's hard to get it. Reflection. So that is the family plot of John Overton Sr. and his family that built Travelers Rest that we just saw. There's no individual headstones or footstones here, so I'm guessing they're all buried around this monument headstone. And this is a memorial tree that was planted by the Sons of Confederacy for the memorial of John Overton and his family. Right here, right beside the family plot. This is the little plaque that tells about the memorial tree. I saw this one close by to John Overton and his family plot. Thought it was pretty cool looking. You got a tree right there by it, leaning sideways. And there's the Overton family plot and the memorial tree. All right, but that's going to do it for this video. Really appreciate you watching. Hope you enjoyed the video. Some American history, some Tennessee history. Hope you might have learned a little something. I learned some stuff. Hope you enjoyed the video. And it's a little windy out here. Wind's picking up a little bit. But guys, I really do appreciate you watching my videos. Subscribers, non-subscribers. If you haven't subscribed, hit that subscribe button. Hit that notification bell and follow me so you know when I put new content out. Hit the like button. Share this video out. Leave a comment. But anyways, like I said, that's going to do it for this one. And in the meantime, I'll see you real soon. Thank you and good night.